Okay, so this is an exciting phase in the upcoming fifth round of Israeli election. It is exciting because today we almost know how the different parties are going to shape up. I say almost because still we might see some reunions coming up, but today is the day that we know the results of all the primaries in the different parties, those that had primaries. So 4 out of the 12 parties that are most likely to getting some position within the Israeli Knesset have just had their primaries last week and this week. And these are the Likud, which is the largest party, and then Labor and Meretz coming from the left, and also religious Zionism, Tzionut Datit coming from the extreme right. So these are the 4 parties that had primaries, and the results are fascinating. In terms of the Likud, because that's the largest party, the kind of single-handed victory is definitely Netanyahu's, because there were many internal struggles within the party, within the Likud, different deals, different ideas about how to shape up the list. And only 2 weeks before the primaries, Netanyahu changed basically the way that those members of Knesset sitting in those seats that are the regional seats coming from the south and the north and the Tel Aviv area, etc. They usually were chosen by a different method, and Netanyahu fight it out and decided that all of them are also going to be elected through general primaries, which means that Netanyahu had much more power to shape up the list the way that he wanted. And what we see is a list which is much more inclined to be, first of all, against the Israeli judicial system, very, very loud and clear voices coming from Yariv Levin, who is the first in the primaries, and Ochana and Salem, and many, many of the first contenders of the Likud list. So this is maybe a bad news for the Israeli democracy, but in terms of the Likud, this is a very clear voice that we hear from the Likud list. The one big draw in the list is in terms of women. The kind of idea of getting the first women a front position in the party actually meant that the women fought one against another. So that means that in the realistic first 30, even 34 seats, we see very few women members of Knesset. So we have Regev and other 4 dominant women in realistic places, but that's that. Out of 34 seats, maybe 4 or 5 women in the Likud list. Very, very disappointing in terms of gender. And we see that the internal deals, those that have a lot of power in terms of the internal mechanisms of the Likud, it didn't actually work that well for them, because the primaries were very much influenced by the kind of spirit that Netanyahu brought to the primaries, and it looks as if Netanyahu is very happy with the list. We can say already that Netanyahu is starting the campaign by hiding some of the more vocal voices against the Supreme Court and against the rule of law in a way, trying to hide them behind the scenes. We have seen that in other previous rounds of elections. So this is the Likud. What is happening with the left? So on the left, we had 2 primaries, one in Labor and one in Meretz. And the most fascinating result there is that both publics of these 2 parties actually gave very, very diminishing reaction to the actual ministers of this party. It was almost 20 years since Meretz was last in government, but all the ministers of the Meretz party are now out of the party. The head, Nitzan Horowitz, has not even competed for the primaries. For the leading position, he got in position 7, which is thought to be unrealistic. And all the other Meretz ministers resigned. So Zandberg and Isawi Frej are now out of the picture. The big fight in Meretz was between Zehava Gal'on, the previous leader that already stepped down 4 years ago and decided to come back and save Meretz, and Yair Golan, who is a deputy of the chief staff of the IDF, former, of course, who challenged her, and he received 40% of the vote. Zehava Gal'on got 60% of the vote, and Meretz is pretty much the old Meretz as we know it. The striking results in terms of the Labour Party is that the two prominent ministers, Bar-Lev and Nachman Shai, were actually casted out of the team. So they got in unrealistic positions, which means that the people that voted in the primaries wanted to see the great parliamentarians that Labour had, but not so much the ministers. And this might be an acute problem of the left in Israel. The left in Israel is not accustomed to ruling the country any longer, and the people that vote for in the primaries actually want to see good parliamentarians. They're less convinced with good ministers, except, of course, Merav Michaeli, head of a Labour Party herself. So in Labour, we see a very young and a very enthusiastic team. The question is, first of all, can they pass the threshold of 4%? And second, how would the votes within the left bloc are going to be divided between Yesh Atid, because Lapid has proved himself a leader which is trustworthy, that gave up his first position, even though he was the head of the larger party. He gave Bennett the rights to go first as a prime minister. Lapid led a very successful in terms of the operation, the military operation against the Islamic Jihad in Gaza. Very short operation with initiative, with not many casualties as you might maybe expected this kind of operation. So Lapid is clearly the leader of the greater, of the biggest party within the center left, and the center left voters will have to decide between the more ideological Labour and Meretz parties and between Yesh Atid. So this is the kind of struggle that we're going to see. Yesh Atid does not have primaries. So Lapid by himself designs the list. This is one of the less democratic parties in the Israeli party system, even though Lapid presents himself as the leader that is going to cherish Israel as a liberal democracy. So this is what happened on the left. On the right, we just had a very, very emotional primaries coming from the religious Zionism. Religious Zionism is a tricky name because it means just the most extreme, both religiously and nationally. It's a very national party. It's not really the party of mainstream religious Zionism in Israel, but by taking the name, they also want to take the voters. And the primaries was only for part of this party, which is Smotrich party. The other part of the party, Otzma Yehudit, Jewish power, led by Ben-Gvir, who is one of the leaders coming from Kahana's almost racist party and very extreme right-wing party, this party did not have primaries. And the big issue now, and you see Netanyahu's involvement in this issue, is whether these two parties, religious Zionism, just had its members elected, and the Otzma Yehudit, Jewish Power led by Ben Gvir, whether they're going to run separately or go together. Why not go together? First of all, because Ben Gvir and Smotrich are in a struggle between themselves. They dislike each other, and it is a personal strife. Secondly, more interestingly, the kind of audiences, even though they're both extreme right parties, the audiences are somewhat different, because Smotrich is much more oriented to towards the more religious Orthodox kind of Jews that are more extremist in terms of the settlements and more extremist in terms of Jewish Orthodoxy on the one hand, and most of them are, we can say, Ashkenazi. And Ben Gvir is the most fascinating phenomena and sad phenomena in Israeli politics. He is an extremist politician, but the one thing that we already see is that those who go after Ben Gvir are those who did not vote for maybe ever in their life. They are the people that come from the outskirts of the ultra-Orthodox Mizrahi Haredi groups, the outskirts of the settlers, not the well-funded settlements, but those on the outskirts of that, and those people that are more racist, nationalist, anti-democratic, anti-liberal, and say so without fear to the cameras. And these are the audiences that Ben Gvir is actually convincing that it is legitimate from his perspective to say such things in the Israeli elections. So this is a very worrisome kind of phenomenon created by Netanyahu, because last election he was pushing Ben Gvir and Smotrich to run together. And the situation today is that Ben Gvir, in all the polls coming after the primaries, he is much stronger, even double the votes that Smotrich has. And Netanyahu is trying to convince them to go together to maximize the votes coming from the extreme right to Netanyahu's bloc. And these two gentlemen have to decide. They have 2 weeks to decide before they have to hand in the list. So these four parties actually had primaries, very exciting, very involving. That's the first phase of Israeli election. The other 6 parties, Yesh Atid, Gantz's party, Machaneh Mamlachti, 2 ultra-Orthodox parties, and Lieberman's party, they don't have primaries. They don't have any kind of elections. The leader decides how the list is going to look like, very undemocratic in terms of the way that we think about internal democracies within the parties. Saying just one word about the Arab parties, we see a fascinating struggle there between Mansour Abbas, on the one hand, the Islamist party that tries to broaden its horizons and to get people from local governance and from different faces of the Arab society, like the Bedouins and other parts of Arab society on the one hand. They are the integrationists. They want to be part of Israeli politics and part of the next coalition. And the joint list, who became more and more radical because Mansour Abbas is much more for cooperation. But we see the nuances. We see that the Balad party is saying, no way we are going to cooperate with the Zionist regime and with the Lapid as the leader, of course not with Netanyahu. So this is on the one hand. And we hear other voices coming from Hadash and from Ahmed Tibi saying, if Lapid and Gantz are not going to go against us during the campaigns, we will consider recommending one of them to be a prime minister, because we understand Netanyahu is a greater threat from their perspective to Israeli democracy and to the Palestinian cause. So this is the kind of party system map that is shaping up. And if you look at the polls coming out over the last 3-4 weeks, you can see that it is a tie, that Netanyahu is around 60 members of Knesset, sometimes 59, 58, sometimes 61 votes. And the other block is not really a block because you have around 54 members of Knesset coming out as the results of the polls that have about 54 people, but then you have the joint list that is swore not to sit in the next coalition that give it as a tie 60-60, the center left and the Netanyahu bloc. So this is the kind of tie that we see in the Knesset today, and this is what the election is supposed to solve, because Israel absolutely needs a more stable government coming the next election. As it looks now, it's not on the cards, but the big factor that is going to be very dominant as we get closer to the election day is definitely going to be the actual turnout, the actual participation of the people. And we're going to be looking at three specific groups within Israeli society. One is the Arab society, because the Arab society votes in lower percentages than the general Israeli public, and this is going to be crucial to the question whether the Arab parties are actually going to go beyond the threshold and be part of the Israeli system. As it looks from the polls now, this is going to be the case, but then again, it depends on the Arab Palestinians that are Israeli citizens actually coming to vote. So this is one audience. The second fascinating audience is those people that usually vote for the Likud. They are the more socioeconomic, poorest layers of society, and usually they vote less than the well-off and more educated people, as we know from other democracy. And then the big question is whether the center-left that has come one after another rounds of Israeli elections in very, very high numbers, whether they're going to give it another chance and show up to the election day, or whether they're too tired and they say, it doesn't really matter, and they will vote in less percentages than they did before. And that is the main factor that is going to determine this election. I could not stress more how crucial this election is for Israeli democracy, because the kind of spirit that now we hear more and more in a clearer voice coming from the extreme right, which is actually pushing the right to the more extreme side of it, is that this is a Jewish state, and basically Jewish national rights come before civic rights or any other rights. And this is a very, very dangerous voice to be having in a liberal democracy. So these are crucial elections, but it will be determined through the turnout on the election day.